I was still in my scrubs when I heard my own death being planned. 18 hours into my birthday, my 70th birthday, and my uniform smelled of antiseptic and suffering. My feet throbbed in white orthopedic shoes that had stopped providing comfort somewhere around hour 14. But my hands, these hands that had bathed infants and comforted the dying for nearly 5 decades, remained steady as I slipped my key into the front door of the home I'd spent 30 years paying for. The house was dark except for the porch light. No surprise. No one had remembered what today was anyway. I set my nursing bag down quietly, not wanting to wake Camille or Vincent. My daughter and son-in-law had moved in with me temporarily 5 years ago. Now they occupied the master bedroom while I slept in what used to be my sewing room. Just one of many small surrenders I'd made in the name of family harmony. The kitchen beckoned. I needed water, perhaps tea, before I could sleep. As I approached, voices drifted through the partially open window facing the back patio. Camille and Vincent were outside, the ember of his cigarette glowing in the darkness. "We can't keep living like this," Vincent was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Your mother is slowing down. She'll need more care soon, not less." I froze, glass halfway to the tap. "I know," Camille sighed. "But what can we do? We've discussed this. She has to go to a facility. The house is worth at least 4 times what she paid for it. We sell it, find her somewhere affordable to live out her years, and finally start living our own lives." The water overflowed in my forgotten glass, cold against my fingers. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Mom would never agree to that," Camille protested, though her tone lacked conviction. "She doesn't have to love the idea, but she's 70 now. Today, actually. It's the perfect time to start the conversation about her future care needs." Even in the darkness, I could imagine Vincent's condescending air quotes. "I've already looked into places. Golden Sunset has basic rooms for under $3,000 a month." "That cheap?" My daughter sounded interested now. "It's not fancy, but it's clean. Besides, she doesn't need fancy. She just needs somewhere to be looked after while we finally get ahead." My own child, discussing warehousing me like unwanted furniture. The daughter I had worked 2 jobs to support after her father left us. The girl whose college tuition I'd paid by taking night shifts at the hospital, coming home at dawn to make her breakfast before my day job began. "I guess you're right," Camille continued. "She's worked her whole life. Maybe she'd actually appreciate the rest." "So it's settled," Vincent said. "Tomorrow we start talking about selling this place. I've already spoken with a realtor friend. He thinks we could list by next month." "What if she argues?" Vincent laughed, a sound I'd grown to dread over the years. "She won't. Your mother never stands up for herself. It's not in her nature." I backed away silently, still clutching my overflowing glass. Water dripped onto the tile floor, but I couldn't bring myself to care. For the first time in my adult life, I felt something dangerous stirring in my chest. Not sadness or resignation, but pure, clarifying anger. In my bedroom, I set down the glass and removed my phone from my purse. My hands, which had remained steady through countless medical emergencies, now trembled slightly as I opened my banking app. First, I revoked all authorized access privileges from both Camille and Vincent's profiles. Next, I changed my password and security questions. Finally, I transferred $27,000, the remainder of my life savings minus 1 month's living expenses, from my primary account to a secondary account I'd opened in secret 3 years ago at a different bank. I had created that account after the first time I'd overheard Vincent discussing Mom's money as if it were a shared resource. At the time, I told myself it was just an emergency precaution. Now I thanked my younger self for her foresight. When I finished, I sat motionless on the edge of my bed, my mind curiously calm despite the betrayal still echoing in my ears. For decades, I had defined myself by my sacrifices, for my patience, for Camille, for everyone except myself. Tonight, something had broken, or perhaps something had finally been set free. I opened my nightstand drawer and removed a faded blue folder. Inside were the remnants of another life, one I had almost lived. College acceptance letters from decades ago. A brochure for a study abroad program in Florence, yellowed with age. A letter offering me a scholarship to complete my literature degree, received the same week I'd discovered I was pregnant with Camille. Dreams deferred, then eventually forgotten. Next to these mementos lay a beautiful leather journal, a gift from Darlene, the night nurse who had relieved me after my double shift. "For all those stories you tell about Italy," she had said, You're always saying you'll visit someday. Maybe you can plan your trip in there. The only birthday gift I'd received today, from a colleague rather than my own flesh and blood. I touched the embossed leather, tracing my initials with a fingertip. How many times had I mentioned my ancestors from Tuscany? How many times had I promised myself someday? A curious lightness settled over me as I reached a decision. Not impulsive, no. This feeling was something else entirely. It was the calm certainty of someone who had finally acknowledged a truth long buried. I owed myself a life. And Vincent was wrong about one crucial thing. It wasn't in my nature to stand up for myself. Until now. I placed the folder and journal on my bedside table and prepared for bed with my usual methodical routine. I would not give Camille and Vincent the satisfaction of seeing my distress. Instead, I would sleep, and tomorrow, I would act. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself wondering, what would they do when they realized their safety net, their ATM, their convenient housekeeper had disappeared? What would happen when they discovered that the woman they thought they knew so well had finally decided to become someone else entirely? For the first time in years, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. I woke before my alarm, my mind unusually clear for 5:30 a.m. In the quiet darkness of my too-small bedroom, I listened to the familiar sounds of my house, Vincent's rhythmic snoring through the wall, the hum of the refrigerator I'd purchased last year after the old one died, the distant rumble of early morning traffic. All so ordinary, yet everything had changed. I dressed deliberately in comfortable slacks and my favorite blue cardigan, travel clothes, though no one but me would recognize them as such. In the kitchen, I made a single cup of coffee and a piece of toast, savoring the simple breakfast as if it were my last meal in this house. Perhaps it was. By 6:15, I had washed my dishes and returned to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. A small act of defiance in a house where my privacy had long been an afterthought. From the back of my closet, I retrieved a small suitcase purchased 6 months ago during a rare shopping trip for myself. Vincent had questioned the expense at the time. "Planning a vacation we don't know about, Judith?" he'd asked with that tight smile that never reached his eyes. "Just replacing my old luggage," I had replied. The zipper broke on my last overnight shift at the Hendersons. Another small rebellion. The suitcase had cost $89, money I could have given to Camille for her perpetually overdrawn checking account. Now, I packed with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime traveling light. 3 changes of clothes, essential toiletries, comfortable walking shoes, my medications, and important documents. Passport, renewed last year, another questioned expense, birth certificate, social security card, and healthcare directives. I added Darlene's leather journal, a photograph of Camille as a child, and my mother's cameo brooch. The rest could stay. They were just things, and I had finally realized that things had been weighing me down. From my sock drawer, I retrieved an envelope containing $3,000 in cash, tips saved from my private nursing jobs over 2 years, money neither Camille nor Vincent knew existed. I tucked this into an inner pocket of my cardigan, along with my credit card and driver's license. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. A 70-year-old woman with silver hair cut in a practical bob, lines etched around her eyes and mouth, wearing sensible clothes and practical shoes. I hardly recognized the spark in those eyes, the determined set of those lips. Who was this woman preparing to walk away from everything familiar? I was about to find out. In the kitchen, I wrote a brief note on my personal stationery. "I've decided to live my own life. Don't worry about me. The mortgage is paid through next month. Judith." I propped this against the coffee maker where they would be sure to find it. No apologies, no explanations. They deserved neither. The Uber I had scheduled arrived precisely at 7 a.m. I slipped out the front door, locking it behind me with a quiet click. The driver, a woman perhaps 20 years my junior with salt and pepper hair, helped me place my suitcase in the trunk. "Airport, right?" she confirmed, checking her phone. "Yes, please. International departures." As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I watched the neighborhood pass by, the elm trees I'd seen grow from saplings, the park where I'd pushed Camille on the swings, the corner store where I still bought the Sunday paper, familiar landmarks of a life that, as of this morning, I was leaving behind. "Special trip?" the driver asked conversationally as we merged onto the highway. "Very special," I replied, surprising myself with the emotion in my voice. I'm doing something I should have done a long time ago. Good for you, she said, meeting my eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. It's never too late, you know. No, I agreed, a smile lifting the corners of my mouth. I'm finally beginning to understand that. We rode in companionable silence after that, the morning sun gradually illuminating the skyline of the city where I'd spent my entire adult life. Had it always been so beautiful, with its mixture of historic buildings and gleaming glass towers? Had I ever really looked? At the airport, I moved with purpose through the bustling terminal. The ticket counter for international airlines loomed ahead, its sign a beacon guiding me toward a decision that, just 24 hours ago, would have seemed unthinkable. I joined the line, my small suitcase beside me, passport in hand. Around me, travelers rushed in all directions, families corralling excited children, business people staring at phones, couples leaning into each other with the easy intimacy of shared adventures. For the first time in decades, I was answerable to no one but myself. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Next, please, called the ticket agent, a young man with a crisp uniform and professional smile. I stepped forward, placing my passport on the counter with steady hands. One ticket to Rome, please. One way. His fingers moved efficiently across the keyboard. Any particular area of Rome you're interested in? I can recommend some hotels if you haven't booked accommodation yet. Actually, I said, the words feeling like a declaration of independence, I'm planning to travel to Tuscany after a few days in Rome. My grandfather came from a small village near Florence. Returning to your roots? He nodded approvingly. That's wonderful. We have a flight departing at 10:45 a.m. with one stopover in London. Would that work for you? Perfect, I replied, handing over my credit card, the one Vincent didn't know about, linked to my secret account. As the agent processed my ticket, I checked my phone one last time. No messages, no calls. They were still sleeping, unaware that their carefully laid plans were crumbling as I stood here. By the time they discovered my note, I would be somewhere over the Atlantic. By the time they figured out what had happened to their access to my accounts, I would be walking the streets of Rome. The thought made me smile. Here you are, Ms. Blackwood, the agent said, handing me my boarding pass and passport. Gate 32B. Boarding begins in 90 minutes. I thanked him and made my way toward security, each step carrying me further from the woman I had been and closer to the woman I might become. Behind me, 70 years of sacrifice and service. Ahead, the unknown, terrifying and magnificent in equal measure. I was ready. Judith has taken her first bold step toward freedom. Where will her journey take her, and how will Camille and Vincent react when they discover she's flown across the ocean? Subscribe now to follow this 70-year-old woman's unexpected adventure as she finally decides to put herself first. The plane tilted skyward, pressing me back against my seat as we ascended through clouds into clear blue emptiness. Below us, the sprawling cityscape where I had spent 7 decades grew smaller until it resembled nothing more than an architect's model. First time flying internationally? Asked the woman beside me, a stylish, silver-haired traveler, perhaps 5 years my junior. First time flying in 23 years, I admitted, and my first time crossing an ocean. She looked surprised. Really? At our age, most people have either been traveling for years or have decided they never will. I decided a long time ago that I would. I just postponed it. Well, she said, extending her hand, I'm Margaret, 4-time visitor to Italy and self-proclaimed expert on which gelato shops to avoid. I shook her hand, appreciating her direct manner. Judith, first-time fugitive from family expectations. The words slipped out before I could censor them. Margaret's eyes widened, then crinkled with delight. Now that sounds like a story worth hearing. Perhaps it was the strange intimacy that develops between strangers on long flights, or perhaps it was simply the liberating knowledge that I was literally above my old life, but I found myself telling Margaret everything. The years of sacrifice, Camille and Vincent's exploitation, the overheard conversation about the nursing home, my abrupt departure. Good for you, she said when I finished, raising her plastic cup of wine in a toast. I left my husband of 38 years after he retired and announced he'd allow me to maintain his schedule of golf games and social obligations now that I'd be home full-time. As if I'd spent decades building my own career just to become his social secretary. We laughed together, the sound startling me with its unfamiliarity. When had I last laughed like this? Genuinely, without restraint? So, what's your plan in Italy? Margaret asked. Besides escaping the ungrateful wretches? I hesitated. I haven't thought much beyond arriving. My grandfather came from a village near Florence. I thought I might start there. You're going to need somewhere to stay while you get your bearings, she said practically. Let me give you the name of a small hotel in Rome where I always stay. It's run by a wonderful family, very safe for women traveling alone, and not too expensive. She wrote the information in my new journal, adding restaurant recommendations and practical advice about train travel in Italy. By the time our meal trays were cleared, I had more useful information than a guidebook, along with Margaret's email address and an invitation to contact her if I needed anything. Women our age need to stick together, she said firmly, especially women bold enough to start new chapters. When we landed in London for our connection, Margaret helped me navigate the sprawling airport to our gate for Rome. As we waited to board the second flight, I checked my phone, switching it from airplane mode for the first time since departure. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, 5 voicemails. They had discovered my absence. The first text, time-stamped 10:22 a.m. Mom, where are you? Tried calling work, but they said you're not scheduled today. The second, 11:07 a.m. Found your note. What does this mean? Call me ASAP. The messages grew increasingly frantic after that. Mom, please call. We're worried. Vincent tried to transfer money for bills, but says the account is blocked. Is something wrong with the bank? This isn't funny. We need that money for the mortgage. If you don't call back, we're filing a missing persons report. The last one, sent just 30 minutes ago. The police say they can't do anything because you left a note and are obviously an adult who left voluntarily. Call me now. I stared at the phone, feeling strangely detached from the panic on the other end of these messages. For so long, any hint of distress from Camille had sent me rushing to fix whatever problem had arisen. Now, thousands of miles separated us, and with that distance came clarity. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the money. Bad news? Margaret asked, noting my expression. Just confirmation that I made the right decision, I replied, showing her the texts. She scanned them quickly. Notice how there's not a single, "Are you okay?" or "What's wrong?" in the bunch. Just demands that you call and panic about money. I nodded, the observation stinging despite its accuracy. Are you going to respond? She asked. I considered the question as our flight began boarding. Was I obligated to ease their minds? To explain my actions? A lifetime of putting others first made the answer seem obvious, but the new voice inside me, the one that had propelled me onto this plane, had a different perspective. Yes, I said finally, but not yet. They've spent years taking me for granted. They can spend a few days wondering where I've gone. Margaret smiled approvingly as we joined the boarding line. The anticipation will be good for them. A little uncertainty builds character. On the flight to Rome, I didn't check my phone again. Instead, I gazed out the window at the Mediterranean glittering below, its vastness a reminder of how small my previous existence had been. Soon, the Italian coastline appeared, then the eternal city itself, spread beneath us like a living museum. As we descended toward Fiumicino Airport, I felt a curious sensation in my chest, something between terror and elation. I had arrived in the land of my ancestors with nothing but a small suitcase and a newly discovered courage. For the first time in decades, I had no one to care for, no one to answer to, no one to consider but myself. The thought was so foreign, it made me dizzy. Or perhaps that was just the landing. Ready? Margaret asked as we taxied to the gate. I took a deep breath. Not remotely, but I'm doing it anyway. She squeezed my hand. That, my dear, is the definition of bravery. The Hotel Trastevere was exactly as Margaret had described, a converted 15th century building tucked away on a cobblestone street, too narrow for cars, its faded yellow facade adorned with flower boxes spilling red geraniums. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and fresh coffee. Signora Blackwood! The proprietor, Giuseppe, greeted me as if I were a returning friend, rather than a first-time guest. Signora Campbell telephoned to tell us you were coming. We have prepared our best single room for you. Margaret's efficiency touched me deeply. While I'd been staring wide-eyed at Rome through the taxi window, she had called ahead to ensure I would be welcomed. My room on the 3rd floor was small but perfect. A comfortable bed with crisp linens, a window overlooking a courtyard where an ancient olive tree grew, and a tiny bathroom with gleaming tile. After the transatlantic journey, The sight of that bed nearly brought me to tears of gratitude. But Rome awaited, and I had waited 70 years to see it. After a quick wash and change of clothes, I ventured out with nothing but Margaret's hand-drawn map and the intoxicating knowledge of my own freedom. The afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light as I wandered the labyrinthine streets of Trastevere, each turn revealing new wonders: a hidden piazza where children played, a centuries-old church with doors standing open in welcome, artisan shops displaying handcrafted treasures. I stopped at a small cafe and, with my limited Italian gleaned from a language app downloaded during my London layover, ordered my first authentic espresso. The waiter smiled approvingly when I consumed it, as the locals did, standing at the bar, no sugar, in 2 perfect sips. "Brava, signora," he said. "Non come i turisti," not like the tourists. My first Italian compliment. As evening approached, I found myself in a small restaurant recommended by Giuseppe. The owner, a robust woman named Sophia, seated me at a table near the window. "You are alone?" she asked, concern creasing her brow. Once, that question would have embarrassed me. Now I smiled. "Yes, happily so." She nodded with understanding beyond words and brought me a glass of local wine without being asked. "For courage," she said, though her expression suggested she recognized I had already found mine. Over homemade pasta that brought unexpected tears to my eyes with its simple perfection, I finally allowed myself to check my phone again. 29 missed calls now, 41 text messages. The latest: "Mom, please just let us know you're safe. We're going crazy here." For the first time, I detected genuine concern beneath the panic, or perhaps the excellent wine was making me generous in my interpretation. I signaled Sophia for another glass and made a decision. Pulling up the camera, I composed a careful shot. My smiling face, the restaurant's warm glow behind me, no identifying details of my location. I sent it to Camille with a brief message. "I am perfectly fine. Enjoying some time to myself. Don't worry about me." Within seconds, my phone exploded with incoming calls. I declined them all and turned the ringer off. They knew I was alive and well. That was enough for now. Sophia returned with my wine. "Problem?" she asked, nodding toward my phone vibrating madly on the table. "No," I replied, turning it face down. "Just family discovering I am not who they thought I was." She laughed, a rich, knowing sound. "Ah, signora, that is the best surprise we can give them, no? To become ourselves at last." After dinner, I strolled back to the hotel through streets now softly lit by old-fashioned lamps, the ancient stones beneath my feet worn smooth by countless travelers over centuries. For the first time since I could remember, I walked without hurry, without destination, without obligation. My phone continued its silent vibration in my pocket. I ignored it, focusing instead on the warm night air, the distant sound of music drifting from an open window, the sheer miracle of being here, now at 70 years old, finally living the life I had deferred for so long. In my room, I prepared for bed with the strange luxury of having no one to care for but myself. No medications to organize for others, no lunches to pack for tomorrow, no alarm to set for someone else's schedule. Before sleep claimed me, I opened Darlene's journal and made my first entry. Today, I became a woman who walks away. A woman who sits alone in restaurants without apology. A woman who sends postcards rather than explanations. Rome is everything I imagined and nothing I expected. Tomorrow, I will see the Colosseum, touch stones that have witnessed millennia, and remember that it is never too late to begin. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through my window and the distant melody of church bells. I dressed with care in the lightweight dress I had packed, one of the few purely frivolous purchases I'd made for myself in recent years, saved for someday. Someday had arrived. Breakfast in the hotel's small courtyard consisted of strong coffee, fresh pastry, and the delicious absence of anyone asking me to get them something while I was up. The elderly couple at the next table nodded good morning, the woman admiring my dress with a murmured compliment that made me stand a little straighter. "What are your plans today, Signora Blackwood?" Giuseppe asked as he refilled my coffee cup. "The Colosseum," I replied, "and then wherever my feet take me." He approved of this approach. Rome rewards the wanderer. Let the city guide you. My phone had accumulated more messages overnight. I scrolled through them quickly over my second coffee. Most were variations on the same themes: Confusion, anger, concern tinged with growing frustration. But one from Camille caught my attention. "Mom, where are you getting money? Vincent says all the accounts are locked and your pension check was deposited yesterday, but he can't access it. We can't pay the mortgage without it." So that was still their primary concern. Not my whereabouts, not my well-being, but access to my funds. I put the phone away without responding and set out into the Roman morning, following Giuseppe's simple directions to the ancient heart of the city. As I rounded a corner and the Colosseum suddenly appeared before me, massive, impossibly old, somehow both exactly as I'd seen in photographs and entirely different in person, I felt something shift inside me. I had spent my life caring for others, my patients, my daughter, my son-in-law, always putting their needs first, always sacrificing my own dreams for someone else's comfort or convenience. And what had it gotten me? A plan to warehouse me in a budget nursing home while they sold my house out from under me. Standing before this monument that had survived millennia, my own lifespan seemed simultaneously insignificant and precious. I had perhaps 15, maybe 20 good years left. How would I spend them? Not in golden sunset assisted living, that much was certain. I purchased a ticket and spent the morning exploring the ancient arena, listening to the audio guide's descriptions of gladiatorial contests and public spectacles. Surrounded by tourists half my age, I climbed stairs that had witnessed the fall of empires, touched stone worn smooth by countless hands across centuries, and felt more alive than I had in decades. By afternoon, as I sat on a bench in the Roman Forum, my phone vibrated with a new message. This one was different, from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is Officer Rivera with Metro Police. Your daughter has filed a missing persons report despite our initial assessment. Please contact either her or our department to confirm your status. This is for your own protection." I stared at the message, irritation warring with understanding. Of course they would escalate when their financial access remained blocked, but involving the police seemed extreme, unless they truly were concerned about my well-being. After a moment's consideration, I composed a reply to the officer. "Officer Rivera, I am Judith Blackwood. I am 70 years old, of sound mind and traveling voluntarily. I have chosen to take a vacation without informing my daughter of my specific whereabouts because I need time alone. I am safe and well. Please consider this formal confirmation of my status. I will contact my daughter when I am ready." I added a photo of myself holding today's newspaper with the date clearly visible, then sent it. Within minutes, my phone rang, the police number. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is Officer Rivera. Thank you for your response. Are you certain you're not under any duress?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. "The only duress I've experienced recently was discovering my daughter and son-in-law planning to put me in a nursing home so they could sell my house." A pause. "I see. And you're currently traveling?" "I am on vacation. A long overdue vacation that I am enjoying immensely." "Understood." His tone softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Blackwood, I told your daughter this appeared to be a case of an adult making their own choices, not a missing person. But she was quite insistent." "I imagine she was," I replied dryly. "Will this message satisfy the department's requirements?" "Yes, ma'am. You're clearly not missing, just taking some well-deserved time." After ending the call, I sat in the ancient forum, surrounded by the ruins of what was once the center of the known world, and laughed until tears came to my eyes. 70 years old, and I had finally become a rebel. After 3 glorious days in Rome, days filled with ancient wonders, unexpected discoveries, and the intoxicating freedom of answering to no one, I boarded a train bound for Florence. The Italian countryside unfurled beyond my window like a Renaissance painting, rolling hills dotted with cypress trees, vineyards arranged in precise rows, occasional villages clustered around church steeples. I had purchased a first-class ticket, another small extravagance that would have been unthinkable in my previous life. The comfortable seat, the complimentary espresso, the attentive service, all reminded me that I was no longer the woman who denied herself every comfort to provide for others. My destination lay beyond Florence, in a small hilltop village called Monteverdi. According to the fragile documents I had inherited from my mother, this was where my grandfather, Antonio Castiglione, had been born before emigrating to America in 1913. I had booked 3 nights at the village's only inn, unsure what I would find, but drawn by the invisible thread of ancestry. The train arrived in Florence by early afternoon. Rather than rushing to make my connection, I decided to spend a few hours exploring the city that had featured so prominently in my abandoned college studies. I stored my suitcase at the station and ventured into the cradle of the Renaissance with nothing but my small purse and boundless curiosity. The Duomo took my breath away, its massive dome dominating the skyline just as it had for centuries. I wandered through the Piazza della Signoria, gazing up at statues that had witnessed the rise and fall of the Medicis. In a small cafe near the Ponte Vecchio, I savored a perfect cappuccino and watched the eternal parade of humanity across the ancient bridge. Had my life taken a different turn, had I accepted that scholarship, completed my literature degree, pursued the academic career I'd once dreamed of, I might have visited these places decades ago. I might have brought students here, pointing out historical details, discussing Dante and Machiavelli against the backdrop of their city. But regret was a luxury I could no longer afford. At 70, looking backward served no purpose except to steal joy from the present. My phone, which had been blessedly quiet since my conversation with Officer Rivera, vibrated with an incoming message. Not Camille this time, but my supervisor from the home care agency. "Judith, hope you're enjoying your much-deserved time off. Your patients are asking when you'll return. No pressure, just planning schedules. Take care." The message was a gentle reminder of the life I had left behind, the patients who depended on me, the responsibilities I had always faithfully fulfilled. For a moment, guilt threatened to cloud my perfect Florentine afternoon. Then I remembered Vincent's words. She has to go to a facility. The house is worth at least 4 times what she paid for it. I typed a quick reply, taking extended leave for personal reasons. Will contact you when I return. Thank you for checking in. Then I put the phone away and continued my exploration, refusing to let obligations from across an ocean intrude on this hard-won freedom. By late afternoon, I boarded a regional train to Monteverdi. As we left Florence behind, the landscape became increasingly rural, the stations smaller and farther between. Few tourists seemed to be making this journey. My fellow passengers were mostly locals returning from work or shopping in the city. The final leg required a transfer to a bus that wound its way up hillsides covered with olive groves. When we finally reached Monteverdi, the sun was beginning its descent, bathing the stone buildings in golden light. The village was smaller than I had imagined, a cluster of weathered stone structures surrounding a central piazza, a church with a modest bell tower, narrow streets barely wide enough for a single car. It looked like a place where time moved differently, where modern life had made accommodations rather than transformations. The Locanda del Sole, my lodging for the next 3 nights, occupied a 3-story building on the piazza. Its wooden sign, faded by countless seasons, creaked gently in the evening breeze as I approached. Inside, I was greeted by an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her face mapped with lines that spoke of a life lived fully. She introduced herself as Sofia Bianchi, the proprietor, and welcomed me in accented but clear English. "Americans rarely come to Monteverdi," she remarked as she showed me to my room on the 2nd floor. "What brings you to our little village?" "My grandfather was born here," I explained. "Antonio Castiglione. He left for America just before the First World War." Sofia stopped midway up the stairs, turning to look at me with newfound interest. "Castiglione? The name is known here. There are still Castigliones in the village." My heart quickened. "Really? I had no idea if any family remained. Marco Castiglione runs the olive press. His father, Enzo, is quite elderly now but still remembers the old days. Perhaps they are your relatives." The possibility that I might have family here, people connected to me by blood and history, had never occurred to me. I had come seeking ghosts, traces of a past I had never known. The idea of finding living connections was both thrilling and intimidating. My room was simple but charming. Whitewashed walls, terracotta floors, a wrought iron bed with a colorful quilt, and a window overlooking the piazza. The furnishings were old but immaculately maintained, giving the space a timeless quality that suited the village perfectly. After freshening up, I returned downstairs to the inn's small dining room. Only 3 tables were occupied, an elderly couple speaking in rapid Italian, a solitary man reading a newspaper, and a family of 4 enjoying what appeared to be a special occasion meal. Sophia, who seemed to serve as both proprietor and waitress, brought me a glass of local wine without being asked. "To welcome you home," she said, with a smile that transformed her serious face. Home. The word resonated strangely. Was this village, which I had never seen before today, more home than the house where I had spent the last 30 years? The house that Camille and Vincent had planned to sell out from under me? Perhaps home wasn't a place at all, but a feeling of belonging, to oneself, to one's own story. As I sipped the wine, robust, earthy, nothing like the occasional glass I allowed myself back in America, I felt the weight of the journey in my bones. Not just today's travels, but the lifetime of deferred dreams that had led me here. "Tomorrow," Sophia said, as she placed a bowl of pasta before me, "I will take you to meet Enzo Castiglione. At 93, his memory comes and goes, but he remembers the old families well. If your grandfather was Antonio, Enzo might know of him." I thanked her, touched by the kindness of this stranger who was treating me like a long-lost relative returning to the fold. That night, in the unfamiliar bed in this ancient village, I slept more soundly than I had in years, lulled by the distant hooting of an owl and the profound silence that exists only in places far from modern life's constant hum. In my dreams, I walked through olive groves with people whose faces seemed familiar though I had never met them, their voices speaking a language I somehow understood despite my limited Italian. They welcomed me, not as a tourist or a curiosity, but as someone who belonged. Enzo Castiglione lived in a stone house at the edge of the village, surrounded by ancient olive trees that twisted toward the sky like arthritic fingers reaching for the sun. Sophia walked me there after breakfast, setting a deliberate pace that accommodated both her arthritis and my tourist's tendency to stop and absorb every detail of the village. "Enzo lives with his grandson Marco and Marco's wife Lucia," Sophia explained as we passed the village's small church. "They care for him, and the olive groves that have been in the family for generations." The morning air carried the scent of rosemary and thyme from garden plots tucked between houses. Laundry flapped on lines strung across narrow alleys, and old men gathered in the square, playing cards and passing judgment on the world with the authority that comes from having seen it change for nearly a century. "Your village is beautiful," I said, pausing to admire a pot of geraniums perfectly framed by a blue window shutter. "It is dying," Sophia replied matter-of-factly. "The young people leave for Florence, for Rome, for anywhere with more opportunity. Only the old remain, and tourists who come for a week each summer." Her frankness was refreshing after decades of American optimism that often felt forced. Here, reality was acknowledged without drama. The village was beautiful, the village was dying, both truths existing simultaneously. When we arrived at the Castiglione home, a woman in her 40s greeted us at the door. Lucia welcomed us with the reserved courtesy of someone accustomed to village life, where privacy and community existed in delicate balance. "Sophia says you are a Castiglione from America?" she asked as she led us through a home that smelled of fresh bread and well-polished wood. "My grandfather was Antonio Castiglione," I explained. "He left Monteverde in 1913. Lucia nodded. "Nonno Enzo is having a good day. He will be pleased to meet you." We emerged into a sunlit courtyard where an elderly man sat in a wooden chair, his face as weathered as the olive trees surrounding his property. Despite his advanced age, Enzo Castiglione projected a dignified presence, his white hair neatly combed, his clothing simple but immaculate. "No, Lucia said. "This is Signora Blackwood from America. Her grandfather was Antonio Castiglione." The old man's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still surprisingly sharp, assessed me with open curiosity. "Antonio?" he repeated, the name clearly awakening something in his memory. "Antonio was my uncle." My breath caught. "Your uncle? Then you're your father's cousin," he said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair beside him. "Antonio was my father's younger brother. He left for America before I was born, but my father spoke of him often." I sat, my knees suddenly weak. I had come hoping for a historical connection, perhaps a mention in village records or a distant family name. I hadn't expected to find a living relative who remembered my grandfather, even secondhand. Sophia and Lucia discreetly withdrew, leaving us alone in the courtyard. Enzo studied my face with the directness of the very old, who have outlived social pretenses. "You have the Castiglione eyes," he declared finally. "The color of amber in sunlight. My father had those eyes. Antonio, too, in the one photograph we had." From a pocket in his cardigan, he withdrew a small leather wallet, and from it, an ancient creased photograph. Two young men stood beside an olive press, their serious expressions typical of early photography when smiling was considered undignified. "My father, Giuseppe, and his brother Antonio," Enzo said, pointing to each figure. "Taken just before Antonio left for America." I stared at the image, transfixed. The younger of the two men, Antonio, my grandfather, looked startlingly like my father in his youth. The same high forehead, the same straight nose, the same determined set of the jaw. Through this faded photograph, I was seeing my own genetic heritage captured a century ago. "Why did he leave?" I asked, returning the precious photograph carefully. Enzo's gnarled hands closed around it with practiced care. "Why does anyone leave? For opportunity, for escape, for love." He shrugged. "The story changes with each telling. My father said Antonio fell in love with a girl from another village whose family disapproved. Others said he simply wanted more than Monteverde could offer." I nodded, thinking of the documents I'd inherited, the immigration papers, the naturalization certificate, the faded letters in Italian that no one in our family could read. So many questions I'd never thought to ask while my father was alive. "Did he ever write home?" I asked. "For a time. Then the war came, and many letters were lost. By the time I was old enough to understand such things, contact had been broken." Enzo's gaze drifted to the olive trees beyond the courtyard wall. "My father always hoped Antonio had found happiness in America." "He did," I said, though I knew so little of my grandfather's inner life. "He married, had 3 children. My father was the youngest. He worked as a stonemason and eventually owned a small construction company." Enzo nodded, satisfied. "He built things. Good. Castigliones have always been builders. Of walls, of olive presses, of families." His roomy eyes found mine again. "And you? Did you build a family in America?" The question, so direct and yet so fundamental, caught me off guard. "A small one," I admitted. "I had one daughter. My husband left when she was young." "And now you have come to find your roots," he observed. "Not as a young woman with life ahead, but as—" He hesitated, perhaps searching for a diplomatic way to reference my age. "As an old woman looking backward?" I suggested, smiling to show no offense was taken. Enzo shook his head firmly. "No, as a woman who has lived long enough to know what questions matter." His insight struck me deeply. I had indeed come to Italy with different questions than I would have brought as a young woman. Not who am I, but who were they? Not what will I become, but what has shaped me? Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marco, Enzo's grandson, and apparently the current patriarch of the Castiglione olive business. In his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and hands calloused from physical labor, he greeted me with cautious warmth. "Nonna says you're Antonio's granddaughter," he said, using the familiar form of grandmother to address Lucia, though she was clearly not old enough for the title. "From America." "Yes," I confirmed. "I only learned recently that we might still have family here." Marco glanced at his grandfather, then back to me. "Blood is blood, even across an ocean. Will you stay for lunch? Lucia has made enough for an army, as usual." The invitation, simple as it was, represented a bridge across decades of separation. I accepted gratefully, and soon found myself seated at a table laden with dishes, whose names I didn't know, but whose flavors spoke of sun-drenched hillsides and centuries of tradition. As we ate, Marco explained the family business, the olive press that had operated continuously for over 200 years, the small but respected production of olive oil that supplied restaurants in Florence, the challenges of maintaining traditional methods in a modernizing world. "We are the last Castigliones in Monteverde," he said, refilling my wine glass. "My son studies engineering in Milan. My daughter works for a fashion house in Rome. They visit on holidays, but—" He shrugged, the gesture eloquently conveying both understanding and resignation. "The village is dying," I said, echoing Sophia's earlier assessment. "Changing," Marco corrected gently, "as it has always changed. People leave, people return. You left through your grandfather. Now you have returned." I hadn't thought of it that way, that my presence here represented not just my own journey, but the completion of a circle begun over a century ago, when Antonio Castiglione boarded a ship bound for America. "Before you go," Enzo said as lunch concluded, "you must take some oil, Castiglione oil, from trees your grandfather once tended." The gift, presented in a small bottle with a hand-printed label, moved me more than any expensive souvenir could have. This was my heritage, literally distilled, the essence of fruits grown on land my ancestors had worked for generations. As Sophia and I walked back to the inn later that afternoon, my steps felt lighter despite the emotional weight of the morning's discoveries. "You found family," she observed. "I found history," I corrected. "But yes, also family." That night, as I sat by my window overlooking the now quiet piazza, I composed a carefully worded email to Camille, the first substantive communication since my departure. "I am safe and well. I'm visiting the village in Italy where your great-grandfather was born. Today I met your cousins, removed by several degrees, but blood nonetheless. I'm learning about our family history and finding parts of myself I never knew existed. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss what happens next. Until then, please know that I am exactly where I need to be." I attached a photo of myself with Enzo, Marco, and Lucia, the ancient olive press visible in the background. Then, before I could reconsider, I hit send and turned off my phone. Family was complicated, both the ones you're born to and the ones you find. But for the first time in decades, I felt anchored to something larger than my immediate obligations. I belonged to this story, this lineage, this land, even if I was only now discovering it. I extended my stay in Monteverde for an additional week, canceling my return ticket to Florence with a simple phone call and €20 extra. Each morning, I woke to church bells and birdsong, spending my days helping Marco with the lighter work of the olive groves, accompanying Lucia to the weekly market in a neighboring village, or simply sitting with Enzo as he shared family stories that had nearly been lost to time. "Your grandfather, Antonio, was the rebel," Enzo told me one afternoon as we sorted dried herbs in the courtyard. "My father said he questioned everything, the priest, the mayor, even their own father. Not from disrespect, but from curiosity." I smiled, thinking of my own lifelong habit of acquiescence, of putting others' needs before my own. Perhaps my recent rebellion had been encoded in my DNA all along, just waiting for the right moment to express itself. On my 6th day in the village, Marco invited me to the olive press, where the first early harvest was being processed. The ancient stone building hummed with activity as workers unloaded crates of olives from small trucks and tractors. "We still use cold pressing methods," Marco explained, showing me the massive granite wheels that crush the olives into paste. "More expensive, more labor, but the quality cannot be matched by industrial processes." The air inside was redolent with the grassy, peppery scent of fresh olives. Workers nodded respectfully as Marco introduced me as our American cousin, the simple words filling me with unexpected pride. "The trees your grandfather tended are still producing," Marco said, pointing through the open door to a terraced hillside where gnarled trees stood in orderly rows. "Some olive trees live for 1,000 years. They connect generations in a way few things can." I thought about that connection as I watched the ancient process unfold, the crushing of the fruit, the separation of oil from water and solids, the eventual emergence of vibrant green liquid that would find its way to tables across Italy and beyond. How many Castigliones had stood in this very spot, watching this same process? How many had dipped bread into oil pressed from these same trees? That evening, as I dined alone in the inn's small restaurant, I finally turned my phone back on. I had been avoiding it since sending the email to Camille, partly from a desire to remain fully present in Monteverde, partly from reluctance to face whatever response awaited me. 26 new emails, 14 text messages, and 3 voicemails. I scrolled through them chronologically, watching the evolution of Camille's reactions. The first responses were predictably angry and demanding. "What do you mean you're in Italy? How could you just leave like this? We've been worried sick. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and we can't access any money. This is beyond irresponsible, Mom." But the later messages showed a subtle shift. "I looked up your great-grandfather, Antonio. Dad never told me much about that side of the family. Are there really relatives still in Italy? The bank says they can't help us access your accounts without your permission. Vincent is furious, but I'm starting to understand why you did this." The most recent email sent just yesterday, struck a different tone entirely. Mom, I've been doing some thinking. Finding those cousins in Italy seems to mean a lot to you. I'm glad you're connecting with our family history, but I'm also worried about practical matters here. The mortgage company is sending notices, and without your pension deposit, we're struggling. Can we talk about a temporary arrangement until you come home? I promise to really listen this time. Home. The word caught in my consciousness, like a burr. Was that house still my home? Would it ever feel like home again, knowing what I now knew about their plans for me? I composed a careful reply. Camille, I'm glad you're taking an interest in our family history. The Castigliones have been in this village for centuries, tending the same olive groves, pressing oil from the same trees. It's a connection I never knew I was missing. As for financial matters, I understand your concern. However, I need to be clear. My pension is my pension. The house is my house. For years, I've supported you and Vincent far beyond what should have been necessary for adults in their 40s. That arrangement is over. I've arranged for the mortgage to be paid directly from my account for the next 2 months. During that time, you and Vincent need to make decisions about your future living arrangements. I haven't decided yet what I'll do with the house when I return, but I will not resume the financial support you've come to expect. I'll be in touch again soon. I hesitated before sending it, questioning whether I was being too harsh. Then I remembered Vincent's words about the affordable nursing home where they planned to store me, and pressed send without further hesitation. The next morning, I joined Lucia for the walk to the village bakery, where the daily ritual of selecting bread brought neighbors together for brief exchanges of news and gossip. You've become quite the local, Lucia observed, as several villagers greeted me by name. Sophia says you've extended your stay again. Just until next week, I confirmed. I need to return to America eventually to sort things out. Lucia nodded, understanding. Marco mentioned your daughter and her husband live in your house? Word traveled quickly in small villages. Yes, they moved in temporarily 5 years ago. Ah, temporarily, Lucia smiled knowingly. Like death and taxes, some house guests are inevitable. We laughed together. The easy camaraderie that had developed between us, a gift I hadn't expected from this journey. Will you sell the house when you return? She asked, as we selected loaves of crusty bread still warm from the oven. The question took me aback, not because it was inappropriate, but because it articulated the thought I'd been circling for days. I'm considering it, I admitted. It holds many memories, but also some recent pain. Lucia paid for our bread, waving away my attempt to contribute. Marco and I have been talking, she said, as we left the bakery. If you sold your American house, you could buy a small place here in Monteverde. Properties are inexpensive now, with so many young people leaving. The suggestion, casual, practical, yet somehow momentous, stopped me in my tracks. Live here? In Italy? Why not? You have family here now. The village could use new blood, even if it comes with— She gestured apologetically at my silver hair. Well-seasoned experience. I laughed at her diplomatic phrasing, but the idea had taken root instantly, sprouting possibilities I hadn't considered. Could I actually do it? Sell my house in America? Buy a small place in this ancient village? Split my time between 2 continents? It's just a thought, Lucia added, perhaps misinterpreting my silence as dismay, but Enzo would be pleased to have his American cousin nearby in his final years. The rest of our walk passed in contemplative silence, the fresh bread warm against my chest, the idea of a new life warming something deeper still. That afternoon, I found myself drawn to the village church, not from religious conviction, but from a desire for quiet contemplation. The simple stone interior, cool and dim, had witnessed generations of Castigliones marking births, marriages, and deaths. Had Antonio knelt at this altar before leaving for America? Had he lit candles for the family he left behind? Had he ever regretted his choice to leave? Or had America provided everything he sought? I wasn't seeking divine guidance so much as connection, to the past, to myself, to possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. As I sat in the hushed sanctuary, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I nearly ignored it, reluctant to break the contemplative mood, but some instinct prompted me to check. A text from Camille. Mom, we need to talk. Vincent moved out today. Things are falling apart here, and I don't know what to do. I stared at Camille's message, the familiar pull of maternal obligation warring with my newfound independence. For decades, any hint of distress from my daughter had sent me rushing to solve whatever problem had arisen. It was the pattern that had defined our relationship, her needs, my solutions, her crises, my sacrifices. Vincent moving out was certainly a crisis, but was it my crisis to solve? I closed my eyes in the quiet church, centering myself in the present moment rather than reflexively responding. The cool stone beneath me had witnessed centuries of human dramas, wars, plagues, loves, losses. My family situation, while significant to me, was but a tiny ripple in that vast historical context. After several minutes of contemplation, I typed a careful response. "I'm sorry to hear that, Camille. What happened with Vincent?" Her reply came almost immediately. "He's been seeing someone else. For 2 years, Mom. Some woman from his office. He says he only stayed because of our financial situation. Now that you've cut us off, he says there's no point pretending anymore." The revelation didn't surprise me as much as it probably should have. There had always been something calculating in Vincent's demeanor, a sense that he measured relationships by their utility rather than their emotional value. "That must be very painful for you," I wrote. "Do you have someone there for support? A friend you can stay with? That's it? That's all you have to say? Mom, I need you to come home. I can't handle this alone." The old Judith would have been booking a flight already, abandoning her own needs to rush to her daughter's rescue. But that woman had disappeared somewhere over the Atlantic 2 weeks ago. "Camille, I understand you're hurting. Betrayal is painful, and endings are hard. But you're not alone. You have friends, colleagues, perhaps a therapist who could help you process this. I'm not coming home yet. I have commitments here that are important to me." I sent the message, then turned off my phone completely and sat in the church for another hour, absorbing the silence, allowing the gravity of my decision to settle within me. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, I had chosen not to rescue Camille. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. When I finally left the church, the setting sun cast long shadows across the village square. I walked slowly back to the inn, greeting the few locals still out and about. Sophia was arranging flowers on the small tables outside the entrance, preparing for the evening meal. "You look troubled," she observed, her directness one of the qualities I'd come to appreciate about Italians. "My daughter's husband has left her," I said simply. "She wants me to come home immediately." Sophia nodded, her expression sympathetic but not particularly surprised. "And will you go?" "No," I said, the words still feeling foreign on my tongue. "No, I won't." "Good." She handed me a small vase of fresh-cut flowers. "These are for your table. Dinner in 30 minutes. That night I slept poorly, my dreams filled with fragments of memory. Camille as a child, reaching for me with complete trust. Camille as a teenager, pulling away with the necessary rebellion of adolescence. Camille as a young woman, increasingly dependent despite her outward independence. Somewhere along the way, our relationship had calcified into an unhealthy pattern. My enabling, her expectation of rescue, both of us locked in roles that prevented genuine growth. By morning, I had reached a decision. After breakfast, I borrowed Sophia's ancient but functional computer and booked a flight, not back to America, but from Florence to London, where I would attend a 2-week literature course at Oxford I'd found online the previous evening. The summer program for mature students focused on Renaissance poetry, a passion I'd abandoned decades ago when practical considerations overwhelmed academic dreams. Only after securing this commitment to myself did I turn my phone back on and call Camille. She answered on the first ring, her voice raw from crying. "Mom, are you coming home?" "No, Camille, I'm not." A sharp intake of breath. "But Vincent's gone, and the mortgage is paid through next month, as I told you in my email. That gives you time to figure out your next steps. What am I supposed to do?" Her voice rose with indignation. "Sell the house? Move into some tiny apartment I can't afford?" "Those are options," I replied calmly. "Or you could get a roommate, or ask for a raise at work, or find a better-paying job. There are many possibilities that don't involve me abandoning my own life to rescue yours." "Your life?" She sounded genuinely bewildered. "You're 70, Mom. What life?" The casual cruelty of the question might have wounded me once. Now, it merely confirmed the righteousness of my decision. "That," I said evenly, "is exactly the attitude that led us here, Camille. The assumption that at 70, my only value is in what I can provide for others, that I have no right to my own dreams, my own adventures, my own choices." I didn't mean, "Yes, you did." And it's exactly what Vincent meant when he said I should go to a nursing home so you two could finally live your lives. Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, you heard that conversation. Every word. On my 70th birthday, after working an 18-hour shift to pay for your latest emergency. The confession hung between us, thousands of miles and decades of unspoken truths suddenly compressed into this single, crackling phone connection. Mom, we were just talking. We didn't really mean— Stop, I interrupted, my voice firm, but not unkind. No more lies, Camille. Not to me, and hopefully not to yourself. You and Vincent saw me as a resource to be used, then discarded when I became inconvenient. I understand that now, and I've accepted it, but I won't participate in it any longer. So you're just abandoning me when I need you most? I'm not abandoning you. I'm allowing you to stand on your own feet, perhaps for the first time. You're 43 years old, Camille. It's time. I could hear her crying softly now, the manipulative edge gone from her tears, replaced by something that sounded more like genuine grief, perhaps for the relationship we'd had, perhaps for the one we might have had if we'd made different choices. What am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice small. Whatever you decide, I replied, but you'll do it as an adult, making adult choices, facing adult consequences. I'll be returning to America eventually, and when I do, we can talk about rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms, but not until I've finished what I've started here. After we hung up, I sat on my bed in the small inn room, emotionally drained but curiously peaceful. Through the open window came the sounds of village life, a woman calling to her child, a scooter puttering up the steep street, the distant clang of tools from Marco's olive press. Life continuing, as it always did, through personal dramas and private revolutions. I picked up the journal Darlene had given me, now half filled with observations about Monteverdi, sketches of olive trees, notes on Castiglione family history, and reflections on my own transformation. On a fresh page I wrote, "Today I chose myself, not from selfishness, but from the recognition that serving others requires a self worth serving from. For too long, I've been an empty vessel, pouring from a well that was never replenished. Now I understand that my own fulfillment isn't contrary to loving others. It's essential to it. I don't know yet what shape my life will take when this journey ends. Perhaps I'll divide my time between continents, between the new family I've discovered here and the daughter with whom I hope to build a healthier relationship. Perhaps I'll sell the house and buy a small place in Monteverdi, as Lucia suggested. Perhaps I'll finally finish that literature degree. What I do know is that 70 isn't the end. It's barely the beginning of wisdom. The spires of Oxford rose like ancient sentinels against the grey English sky, so different from the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany, yet equally steeped in history. I wheeled my small suitcase through cobblestone streets that had witnessed 8 centuries of scholarly pursuit, feeling both intimidated and exhilarated. My 2-week literature course, Renaissance Poetry, from Petrarch to Milton, was housed in one of the university's oldest colleges. The program for mature students had attracted an eclectic group of participants, retired professors seeking intellectual stimulation, successful professionals pursuing long-deferred interests, and a few people like me embarking on late-life academic adventures. The accommodations were Spartan but comfortable. A single room in a dormitory, usually occupied by undergraduates, with a narrow bed, simple desk, and window overlooking a quadrangle where students had walked since the 1400s. After the warmth and familial atmosphere of Monteverdi, the formal, almost austere environment of Oxford required adjustment. Yet as I arranged my few belongings and prepared for the welcome reception, I felt a quickening of intellectual excitement I hadn't experienced in decades. Here, no one knew me as a mother, a nurse, a caretaker. Here, I was simply Judith Blackwood, student of literature. The course director, Professor Harrington, was a woman perhaps 15 years my junior, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the brisk manner of someone who had spent a lifetime commanding attention in lecture halls. "Welcome to Oxford," she announced to our group of 24 students gathered in a wood-paneled common room. "For the next 2 weeks, we will immerse ourselves in some of the most transformative poetry ever written. Leave behind your other identities, your daily concerns. Here, you are scholars, first and foremost." I glanced around at my fellow students, noting with relief that I wasn't the oldest person in the room. A distinguished-looking gentleman with a neatly trimmed white beard appeared to be well into his 80s, while several others seemed to be contemporaries of mine. After the reception, we were assigned to small discussion groups of 6 students each. Mine included Elaine, a retired high school teacher from Vancouver; Richard, a former diplomat from Australia; Sanjay, a cardiologist from Mumbai; Helen, a librarian from Edinburgh; and George, the white-bearded gentleman I'd noticed earlier, who introduced himself as a recovering corporate attorney from Boston. "What brings you to Oxford, Judith?" George asked as we found seats together at dinner in the college dining hall. "A very delayed pursuit of an interest I abandoned in my 20s, I replied, still finding it strange to tell my story to people who knew nothing of my past. "I was studying literature when life took a different turn." "Ah, the road's not taken," George nodded. "I spent 40 years helping corporations avoid taxes and negotiate mergers. All the while, the poetry I loved as an undergraduate gathered dust on my shelves." "Better late than never," contributed Elaine, raising her glass in a toast that we all joined. That night, as I prepared for bed in my austere room, I checked my phone for the first time since arriving in England. 2 emails from Camille. "Mom, I had a long talk with my therapist about our relationship patterns. She thinks we've developed an unhealthy codependency over the years. I'm starting to see that you might be right about needing to stand on my own feet." And then, sent just hours ago, "I found a roommate. My colleague Jennifer is going through a divorce and needs a place to stay. We're going to split the mortgage until you decide what you want to do with the house. It's temporary, but it feels like a step in the right direction." I read the messages twice, hardly believing their constructive tone. Was this the same daughter who had demanded I abandon my journey to solve her problems? The same woman who had asked what kind of life a 70-year-old could possibly have? Perhaps the shock of Vincent's departure had created space for genuine reflection, or perhaps the reality of my continued absence had forced a reckoning with our unhealthy patterns. Whatever the cause, this glimpse of maturity and self-awareness was the most encouraging communication I'd had from Camille in years. I sent a brief, supportive reply. "I'm proud of you for taking these steps, Camille. The roommate arrangement sounds sensible, and I'm glad you're continuing with therapy. We'll figure out the house situation when I return. For now, I'm about to begin an intensive literature course at Oxford, something I've dreamed of doing since before you were born. I'll be in touch when it concludes." The following morning, our studies began in earnest. Professor Harrington's lectures were demanding, assuming a level of literary knowledge many of us had to scramble to recall or acquire. Our afternoons were spent in small group discussions, analyzing sonnets and pastoral elegies with an intensity that left my brain delightfully exhausted. To my surprise, I found myself participating actively, offering interpretations that occasionally drew approving nods from both Professor Harrington and my fellow students. The analytical skills I'd honed as a nurse, careful observation, pattern recognition, attention to subtle changes, transferred surprisingly well to literary analysis. "You have a natural ear for the music in Milton's verse," George commented, after I'd made a point about rhythmic patterns in Lycidas during our 3rd day of discussions. "Have you considered pursuing a degree? Oxford has excellent programs for mature students." The question caught me off guard. A degree? At 70? The idea seemed simultaneously absurd and tantalizing. "I haven't thought that far ahead," I admitted. "This course is my first step back into academic waters after nearly 50 years. "Well, you're swimming rather impressively for someone who's been on dry land so long," he replied with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. As the days passed, Oxford worked its particular magic on me. I fell into the rhythm of academic life. Morning lectures, afternoon discussions, evenings spent reading in the college library or enjoying conversations with my new friends over glasses of wine in ancient pubs where literary giants had once argued philosophy. I found myself particularly drawn to George, whose incisive mind was matched by a self-deprecating humor and genuine interest in others' perspective. Our conversations ranged from poetry to politics, from art to personal philosophies, with an ease I'd rarely experienced. "Would you care to join me for a punting expedition on Saturday?" he asked after our Thursday seminar. "Weather permitting, of course. This is England, after all." The invitation stirred a flutter of unexpected nerves. Was this a friendly outing between classmates or something more? At 70, I found myself experiencing the same uncertainty I might have felt at 20. I'd like that, I replied, surprised by my own lack of hesitation. Saturday dawned improbably sunny. George proved to be surprisingly adept at navigating the flat-bottomed boat along the river, pointing out college buildings and recounting historical anecdotes as we glided under stone bridges and past willow trees trailing their branches in the water. I spent a year here as a graduate student, he explained, before the siren song of corporate law and its considerable paycheck lured me back to America. Any regrets? I asked, trailing my fingers in the cool water. About returning to America? No. About allowing my passion for literature to be subsumed by career and conventional success? He paused, considering. Yes and no. My legal career provided well for my family, funded my children's education, allowed me to retire comfortably. But there was a cost. There always is, I murmured, thinking of my own choices, the literature degree abandoned for practical nursing, the dreams deferred for Camille's needs, the gradual erosion of self in service to others. The trick, George said, skillfully maneuvering the punt around a bend in the river, is recognizing that it's never too late to recalibrate, to adjust the balance. As we picnicked on the riverbank later, sharing a lunch of bread, cheese, and fruit provided by the college kitchen, I found myself telling George about Monteverdi, about discovering my Castiglione relatives, about Lucia's suggestion that I consider dividing my time between America and Italy. It sounds like you're contemplating a significant life change, he observed. Several, actually. Selling my house, potentially. Establishing boundaries with my daughter. Possibly even pursuing further education. I shook my head, still amazed at my own boldness. If you'd told me a month ago that I'd be considering any of this, I'd have thought you were describing someone else entirely. And yet here you are, he said, discussing Renaissance poetry at Oxford and planning a transcontinental life at 70. Rather remarkable, Judith Blackwood. His admiration, offered without condescension or surprise, warmed me more than the gentle English sun. For so long, I had been defined by what I gave to others. To be seen and appreciated for my mind, my courage, my choices, this was perhaps the most transformative aspect of my journey so far. That evening, as our group gathered for a formal dinner in the college hall, seated beneath portraits of scholars long dead but not forgotten, I felt a profound sense of belonging, not just to this temporary academic community, but to the larger tradition of human inquiry and reinvention. To new beginnings, George proposed, as we raised our glasses in toast. At any age, to new beginnings, we echoed. Later, walking back to our dormitory under a sky pricked with stars, George took my hand, his fingers warm against mine in the cool night air. The gesture was both tentative and deliberate, offering connection without demand. I found myself holding on, surprised by how natural it felt, how right. At 70, standing on an ancient Oxford street with my hand in a near stranger's, I was discovering that life could still offer unexpected gifts to those brave enough to receive them. The international arrivals terminal bustled with the particular energy of homecomings, families clutching welcome signs, business travelers striding purposefully toward ground transportation, weary tourists navigating the controlled chaos of customs and baggage claim. I moved through the crowd with a confidence that would have surprised my former self. After 5 weeks abroad, 2 in Italy discovering my roots, 2 at Oxford rediscovering my intellectual passions, and a final week in London with George exploring museums and possibilities, I was returning to America, changed in ways both profound and subtle. My phone pinged with a message as I cleared customs. Almost there. Can't wait to see you. See, Camille had insisted on picking me up, despite my protests that I could manage a taxi. Please, Mom, she'd written. I want to do this. A small olive branch, perhaps, or a genuine desire to demonstrate her newfound maturity. Either way, I had accepted with cautious optimism. As I emerged into the public area, wheeling my suitcase, now adorned with colorful tags from Rome, Florence, Oxford, I spotted her immediately. Camille stood slightly apart from the waiting crowd, scanning faces anxiously. She looked thinner than when I'd left, with new shadows beneath her eyes. But there was something else different about her that I couldn't immediately identify. Mom, she waved, pushing through the crowd toward me. Welcome home. Home. The word still carried complicated resonances. She embraced me with unexpected emotion, holding on a moment longer than our usual perfunctory hugs. When she pulled back, I realized what had changed. She'd cut her hair short, a practical style that framed her face beautifully, but represented a significant departure from the carefully maintained long locks she'd worn for decades. "You look wonderful," she said, studying me with genuine curiosity. "There's something different about you." 5 weeks of pasta and gelato, probably, I joked, deflecting the observation. "No, it's not that. You look, I don't know, more yourself somehow." The insight surprised me, coming from a daughter who had rarely seemed to see me clearly. Perhaps her own recent upheavals had granted her new perspective. As we drove from the airport toward the house that still legally belonged to me, but had become her primary residence, Camille filled me in on developments during my absence. Vincent's officially moved in with her, Brenda from accounting. She said this with remarkable equanimity. They've been seeing each other for over 2 years, apparently. Everyone at his office knew except me. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything. Betrayal always cuts deep, regardless of the relationship's health. She shrugged. "My therapist says I was choosing not to see the signs, part of our pattern of, what did she call it? Mutually reinforced denial. We were both pretending our marriage was something it wasn't." We drove in silence for a moment, the suburban landscape so familiar, yet somehow flattened after the dimensional richness of Italian villages and Oxford's ancient stones. "Jennifer's working out well as a roommate," Camille continued. "She's neat, pays her share on time, and doesn't mind that I've been redecorating." "Redecorating?" "Just small things. I realized I've been living in a house that never really reflected my taste. Just Vincent's preferences and, well, your original choices. It feels good to make the space more mine." I nodded, noting her use of mine rather than ours. Small shifts in language often signal larger shifts in perspective. And work is actually going better. I applied for that promotion I've been avoiding, the one with more responsibility but better pay. I have a second interview next week. Each piece of news revealed a Camille I barely recognized, taking initiative, making changes, facing reality head-on rather than waiting for rescue. Had my absence truly catalyzed such growth? Or had these capacities been latent within her all along, suppressed by our dysfunctional dynamic? When we arrived at the house, I was struck by subtle differences. New curtains in the living room, rearranged furniture, a collection of art books where Vincent's sports memorabilia had once dominated. Sunflowers brightened the kitchen table, and the pervasive scent of Vincent's expensive cologne had been replaced by a light, citrusy fragrance. "Jennifer's at her sister's this weekend," Camille explained, carrying my suitcase to what had once been my bedroom, but had apparently been restored to that purpose in my absence. "I thought you might want some time to readjust before meeting her." The consideration in this gesture, the awareness of my potential need for space after weeks of travel, was another small indication of change. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's been a long journey. I made pasta for dinner," she added, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Nothing like what you probably had in Italy, but I've been teaching myself to cook. Turns out I actually enjoy it when I'm not just rushing to get food on the table for Vincent's schedule." Over dinner, a creditable attempt at pesto that showed genuine effort if not Italian authenticity, Camille asked about my travels. To my surprise, her questions focused not on when I was planning to resume financial support or what I intended to do with the house, but on my experiences and discoveries. "Tell me about our Italian relatives," she requested, refilling my water glass with a natural thoughtfulness I couldn't recall seeing before. "Do I really have cousins there?" I described Enzo, Marco, and Lucia, explaining our family connection and sharing anecdotes about life in Monteverdi. Camille listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking follow-up questions about the olive business and the village's history. "And Oxford?" she prompted, when I finished the Italian chapter of my journey. "What was that like?" I told her about the course, the literature that had reawakened my intellectual passion, the friends I'd made. When I mentioned George, her eyebrows raised slightly, but she made no comment beyond asking what he had taught before retirement. It was the most natural conversation we'd had in years, perhaps ever as adults. No underlying tension about money, no subtle manipulation, no unstated expectations. Just two women sharing experiences across a kitchen table. After dinner, as we washed dishes together in companionable silence, Camille finally broached the subject I'd been expecting all evening. "I've been thinking about the house," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I know it's yours, and you have every right to sell it if that's what you want. I waited, sensing she had more to say. But I'd like to buy it from you if possible. Not right away. I'd need time to secure financing, especially with the divorce proceedings just starting. But Jennifer is interested in a long-term roommate arrangement, and with the promotion, well, it might be feasible. The proposal caught me by surprise. I had indeed been considering selling the house, perhaps using the proceeds to purchase a small place in Monteverde, as Lucia had suggested, while maintaining a pied-à-terre in America for visits with Camille and continued exploration of my renewed academic interests. You want to buy the house? I repeated, wanting to be certain I understood. If you're willing to consider it, she said. I know I have no right to ask after everything. But this place has been home for the past 5 years, and I've realized recently how much that stability means to me. I studied my daughter's face, the new maturity in her expression, the absence of the entitled expectation I'd grown accustomed to seeing. This request wasn't a demand. It was a proposal between adults. I'll think about it, I promised. It's a possibility worth exploring. Later that evening, as I unpacked in what had once been my bedroom, but now felt more like a guest room, in what had once been my house, but now felt more like Camille's home, I realized we had come full circle in an unexpected way. 5 weeks ago, I had fled a house where I felt unwelcome, escaping the plans others had made for my future without consulting me. Now I had returned to find my daughter making her own plans while respecting my autonomy to make mine. Before sleep claimed me, I texted George, landed safely. Surprising but positive reception from Camille. Significant changes apparent. We'll call tomorrow with more details. Missing our London walks already. His reply came within minutes. Glad to hear about positive developments with Camille. London misses you too, as do I. Don't forget our discussion about possibilities. Some things shouldn't be deferred any longer than necessary. Sleep well, remarkable Judith. I smiled in the darkness, thinking of our final days in London, walking through the National Gallery, discussing art and literature, and the possibility of building something together, despite, or perhaps because of, our advanced ages and accumulated wisdom. We're old enough to know what matters, he'd said as we stood before a Rembrandt self-portrait, the artist's aging face rendered with unflinching honesty and profound humanity, and young enough still to pursue it. As I drifted toward sleep in a bed that had once represented obligation, but now felt simply like a temporary resting place between adventures, I thought about the various futures opening before me. A small stone house in Monteverde, with mornings spent helping Marco in the olive groves, and afternoons writing the memoir I'd begun sketching in Darlene's journal. A modest apartment near Oxford, where I might finally complete the literature degree I'd abandoned half a century ago. Visits with George in Boston or London, or wherever our late-blooming connection might lead us. Regular but boundaried time with a daughter who seemed, at last, to be finding her own path, rather than depending on me to clear it for her. None of these possibilities had existed in my consciousness 6 weeks ago, when I'd overheard my son-in-law planning my consignment to a budget nursing home. The woman I had been then, exhausted, exploited, resigned to invisibility, would hardly recognize the woman I had become. Or perhaps she would. Perhaps this woman, independent, intellectually engaged, open to new experiences and connections, had been there all along, waiting for permission to emerge. It had taken 70 years, a devastating betrayal, and a leap into the unknown, but I had finally granted myself that permission, not just to exist, but to live, not just to serve, but to flourish, not just to age, but to grow. Tomorrow would bring decisions, practical considerations, the beginning of whatever next chapter I chose to write. But tonight, drifting between worlds, between America and Italy, between my past life and my future one, between obligation and freedom, I was precisely where I needed to be, in transition, in possibility, in the process of becoming more fully myself with each passing day. At 70 years old, I was just beginning. Judith has come full circle, returning to America transformed by her experiences abroad. With a newly independent daughter, the possibility of romance with George, and exciting opportunities in both Italy and Oxford, she faces her future with hard-won wisdom and optimism. This remarkable 70-year-old woman has proven that it's never too late to reclaim your life and pursue your dreams. Thank you for following her inspiring journey.